Excuse me.
Is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Good morning. My name is Andre Ward. Discriminatory practices against people who have criminal justice histories. We are here today to demand that New York City Council pass the Fair Chance for Housing Act bill. The number of that bill is Intro 2047. We believe that housing is a human right. According to DSH data, one of the top reasons people enter the shelter system in recent releases from prison and from jail. And today we stand right in front of Bellevue Men's Shelter, which is a landmark facility and a facility where over 50% of the people that are released from New York State prisons go to. It is not a place where human beings should go to live a life of contribution. And one of the major threats to public safety is not allowing people who have come home from jails and prisons to access housing. And to discriminate against them is wrong.
Oh my God.
That's why we say housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Today, we have traveled here from the Manhattan Detention Complex because we wanted to make a trek from one place to another to demonstrate the coalition's commitment to ending housing discrimination practices and lifting it up in the public so that it can be supported in terms of this bill, Intro 2047. We'll hear from speakers today, speakers who will give testimony about how housing discrimination has impacted their lives. We'll hear from the major sponsor of Intro 2047, Councilmember Stephen Levin. And at this time, we're going to bring on Councilmember Stephen Levin to give us some words. He has been a champion for this campaign, a champion and leader for this bill, and we want to welcome him. Help me welcome Councilman Stephen Levin. Thank you,
Andre. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Very gratified to be here today and to make this trek with you all because we have this chance right now. We have a chance and an opportunity to demonstrate that we as a city, we as a people, we as a society in New York, we have the opportunity to demonstrate that we can live up to our rhetoric, that we can live up to who we say we want to be, to who we say that we are, that we could put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, you're not being warehoused, you.
So right now,
Oh God.
right now, now we have
Excuse me, beep, beep, move, 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 move,
Asshole.
move.
Yeah, run, bitch.
right now, as it is, right now, when people are released from prison in New York State, in New York City, this is their welcome. 33 men's shelter. That's not who we are. That's not who we want to be.
Sorry.
And the fact of the matter is that discrimination against people with incarceration history, conviction history, is rampant. It's rampant.
Oh my God. Stop them.
It's rampant throughout this city. And unless we do something to stop it, it's going to continue. So we need to put our values forward. We need to put our values front and center and say, we are going to live it. We are going to live it. We are going to make sure it's reflected in our laws. And so we have this opportunity. So what we're asking for today is bring Intro 2047 to a vote. Make sure that the bill stays the way it is, that it's not watered down at all.
That's right.
This version of this bill, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm the sponsor of the bill, but it is among any jurisdiction in this country, whether it's cities or states that have tried to do this. This is the best version of fair chance for housing anywhere in the country. Woo! This bill.
Woo!
And if we pass this bill as it is, it will be the gold standard for fair chance for housing for every other city in America. And every other state in America. So we have this moral obligation right now to stick with this. And I will say this again. This is the most amazing, wonderful, inspiring coalition that I've had the opportunity to be a part of in the 12 years that I've been in council, and the 15 years that I've been in government.
That's right.
It is spoken with one voice. It has been absolutely assured of the righteousness of the task, and it has been just inspiring to be a part of. And so I want to thank you. I love you all. It has been amazing working with you. Today is the day that we kick off, final kick here, to get this bill passed by the end of this year. Thank you.
We want to thank Councilmember Levin for being the chief sponsor of this bill. His commitment to ensuring that this bill is passed is noteworthy. While many others may shroud and be afraid, Councilmember Levin demonstrates a consistent kind of bravery to make sure that New York City pays attention to this bill and creates opportunities for all people. As we said, we're here in front of Bellevue's men's shelter. We know that many of the people here in Bellevue's men's shelter suffer from mental health conditions. They're not bad people. They're people that need treatment and intervention. They need opportunities to heal, to be able to contribute to society in New York City. So it is for people who are experiencing discrimination in housing. They need opportunities too. All New Yorkers need opportunity to access housing. And so housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
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 And who can be better representative of the issue than those who are directly impacted by it? People that are impacted by housing discrimination because of their conviction histories are best informed to offer insight and solutions to how we deal with this issue of housing discrimination. So at this time, I want to bring on Deputy Public Advocate Delisha Glover.
But everybody gets my name wrong. Thank you, Andre. Pass the bill.
Pass the bill. Pass the bill.
Pass the bill.
So I am very pleased and proud to stand here on behalf of the Office of the Public Advocate and Johnny Williams in support of Councilmember Levitt. Thank you, Penny. You really worked hard and toiled to get the right. Appreciate you. We appreciate you, and the whole city appreciates you. So thank you. We're proud to stand here with you in support of passing the bill as it is. I'm not going to talk about what the bill does because at this point everyone knows what the bill does. But I will talk about how important it is that this bill passes and passes as soon as possible. We have Shams here today. We have a homeless crisis in this city that has reached horrific proportions. Many of those who are homeless, of course, as we are talking about, have also been through the criminal justice system. It is a shame and a disgrace that at this time in history, we still have these vestiges of racism in housing, in criminal justice, which is what this is. How can a person who has committed a crime and paid their debt to society return to a society with this current practice? They can't have a home, they can't get a job. It is utterly ridiculous. And as a black woman, I look at everything through the prism of racism, when that's what it is. And when I see it, when I see it, I call it out. That's right. I call it out. That's right. You can't hide from it.
Call it
That's
out.
what it is. It is all Black Lives Matter.
That's right.
We know that most people who are homeless are black and brown. We also know that those same people end up in a shelter because they cannot acquire a decent home. We have set up a self-perpetuating system of criminalizing black and brown bodies, and this bill will go a long way to bring an end to this very shameful practice. While I have the microphone, we just saw an incident that happened just a little while ago. Just as a last line, the criminalization of homelessness and mental illness needs extreme attention right now.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Ridiculous. These people need to be cared for and not roaming the streets because they get hurt too. And it's not if they hurt others, it's not their fault. It's the fault of this city for what they're doing with these people, rounding them up, putting in jail, putting them in convict shelters where they will probably or may die. It's absurd. It is a disgrace. I'm sick of it. Get this bill done, then we tackle the rest. Because we do, Councilmember Levitt, have to tackle this issue of mental illness in the city.
Thank you. Fight, fight, fight. Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
How's everybody feeling? Y'all fired up?
Fired up. Tell the city to stop robbing the taxpayer, paying $20,000 to keep somebody in there when they could give somebody permanent housing. They're paying $20,000 a month to keep somebody in that dirty shelter.
That's right. Thank you for that.
Come on.
And we want to thank Deputy Public Advocate Delcinia Glover for her powerful words. And we want to thank Public Advocate Jamani Williams. We want to thank each of them for their strong backing of Intro 2047, which is the Fair Chance for Housing Act. Because housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
We have people who have criminal justice histories or criminal legal histories can change their lives.
Yes.
And giving people an opportunity to have housing gives people an opportunity to change their lives.
Yes.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight. Fight, fight, fight.
I'm going to bring on somebody who is a long-time advocate and who's also directly impacted by this issue. None other than Hilton Webb Jr. Hilton is a long-time Fair Chance for Housing campaign member. He has a bachelor's degree in history, earned in Attica Correctional Facility from Canisius College, where he graduated summa cum laude.
Woo!
And this year, he graduated from Lehman College's Selected Members Masters of Social Work program.
Woo!
Thank you, everybody. Before I start, I just want to address two things. One, that let's pay homage to the land we stand on as Lenape land, the ancestors that lived here. And let's also be aware, as Councilman Public Advocate Glover was speaking about the mental health issues in this country. That young man who walked through here has an issue. And we have to be cognizant of that issue and treat him with kindness. Not react badly because it's not his fault. When they closed the mental hospitals in the 70s, this is what we did. And that's what jails are, warehouses for mental health. There's a young woman laying on the ground over there sleeping. That shouldn't be allowed in the richest community. That's all I'm going to say. So good afternoon, New York. My name is Hilton Webb Jr. I'm here in advocacy for the City Council Bill Intro 2047, the Fair Chance for Housing Act, to be passed this year. This bill will eliminate background checks for the formerly incarcerated and people with conviction records, which includes nearly 750,000 New Yorkers, 80% of them Black, brown, or Latinx. Unless you've been asleep for the last few years, you know it isn't because we do more crime. It's because the system works exactly as it was designed to work, disenfranchising people of color. After 28 years in prison, I didn't have any parole-approved places to go. So they told me to report to Bellevue Men's Shelter, right over there. I know that emergency shelter is unfortunately necessary, but after one night in the shelter, I knew I would much rather be back in prison or living in a box on the side of the street. This is not a place in which you can build a successful life. It's not a place in which to build a foundation. It's not a place one comes back to at night after a hard day in court. I realize that in this world there are many wrongs that need righting. There are many issues that need to be addressed. But the reality is that safe, affordable housing is not one of those issues. Safe, affordable housing is not just another law. This needs addressing. Safe and affordable housing is a human right.
Woo!
Not just for people who are formerly incarcerated, but for every human being in this city. As a formerly incarcerated person of color forced into city shelter system, I am both invisible and ubiquitous. I am the person on the subway whose body odor offends you. I'm the man who walks through a rally cursing people. I am the woman on the corner whose sad story elicits the occasional crumpled dollar. I am that vaguely human specter who haunts the streets, looking for all that he has lost. I am the pedestrian at whom the passersby sneer, "Get a job!" I am the name on a rejected tenant application.
The rain is coming.
Repeatedly set aside when the background check returns. Despite roadblocks placed in my way, I served my time. And I've done my part to change. Now it's time for New York to change. We must ask Corey Johnson to bring Intro 2047 for a vote this year. In prison, I dreamed of finding a job and a place of my own. Two of the most foundational aspects of successful reentry. Research shows that having safe and adequate housing increases the likelihood that a person leaving prison or jail will be able to connect with the new or existing family support, find and retain employment, and rebuild supportive relationships. For those dreams have shattered into nightmares because of the ubiquitous background checks. Nothing I've done since returning to Society matters. Not my recent graduation, as Andre told you about, not my 728 credit report, not the fact that I've successfully completed with growth and supervision. The only thing which matters to landlords is that I'm formally incarcerated, a thing which I cannot change. I still wear the scarlet eye of incarceration upon my forehead at every prospective housing opportunity. I ask you fellow New Yorkers, at which point does the punishment stop? This is why I stand before you today. Although I was fortunate to find a place to stay within the Fortress Society supportive housing in Harlem, it is not a permanent solution to my situation. It's past time for me to move on so the next person can have a safe place to lay their head. And I cannot, because the background check overrides everything I have done since I've been out, and I remain in limbo, unable to move forward and unwilling to move backward. This is why today I ask you to get behind Intro 2047 and contact your city council member to vote for it. Call, write, email, Instagram, and tweet your support. Contact everyone you know and get them to support passage of this bill, because it is critically important to all New Yorkers that no one be denied a safe place to put their heads at night. Pass Intro 2047 this year. Thank you for your
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
End perpetual punishment. End perpetual punishment. End
Perpetual punishment.
We want to thank Hilton for those words. And at this time, we want to bring on someone else who serves as a hero to us because of his consistent fight to end housing discriminatory practices against people with criminal legal histories. And that's none other than Shams, the homeless hero, the Baron.
Woo!
So Shams, and before we bring him up, because I know he's ready to say something really impassioned, he's an advocate fighting to end homelessness. He is a resident at the Lutheran Hotel on the Upper West Side and has been an advocate for the residents there. He is also finalist for the David Prize, which is a celebration of individuals to create a better, brighter New York City. Help us bring Shams on.
Woo!
To be honest, I don't know how passionate I'm gonna be today because I'm really, I've been moving around so much, I'm really tired. But I'll try to say something. Before I read, it's weird because when I hear from other directly impacted people, it always moves me. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's triggering. Seeing the brother come through that's dealing with mental illness, and hearing this brother talk about putting himself in the shoes of so many people, I can identify with all that. You know, I came through Bellevue, and I'm one of those that chose the streets, the safety of the streets, over being in Bellevue, over being at Ward's Island, and those congregate settings that I call congregate death traps. So I want to talk about, well, as you know, my name is Shams, the Baron, aka the Homeless Hero. I'm an activist working specifically to end homelessness, but also to bring about liberation for black and brown people. At the end of the day, it's bigger than homelessness.
That's right.
As Delcinia was talking about, this is always a racial justice issue. When you look at the data, and it says that 90% of us, black and brown, are in these congregate death traps. So I want to talk about why the Fair Chance for Housing Act is so important right now during this pandemic. I was homeless on and off for most of my life, and last year I got COVID while living in a congregate shelter and almost died. Fortunately, I survived and benefited when the mayor was forced to place those of us who were in these congregate death traps into hotels. At the Lucerne Hotel, I experienced something different. The fear of sickness and death that engulfed the men of the Lucerne and people in congregate shelters was gone. we began to stabilize. I brought services on site from Private Renewals Recovery Center and from the Open Hearts Initiative. Living in the hotel wasn't the same as having permanent housing, but after a few months in the hotel, it wasn't long before we started thinking, maybe we can go get a job. Maybe we can do something to help our families as we helped ourselves. I'm now housed and I'm speaking strong, but I'm speaking from a position of pain. Because my homeless brothers and sisters are being and have been sent back to these congregate shelters, even as the pandemic is still raging. Instead of sending people to congregate death traps, the city should be doing everything it can to move people into permanent housing. That's why Intro 2047 is so important. The council passed Intro 146 to increase the rates of city feds vouchers, and the new rates will be implemented in September, which was a huge victory. But unless we pass Intro 2047, too many homeless New Yorkers will still have major barriers to get permanent housing. One of the top 2 reasons people enter the shelter system is recent release from jail to prison. 90% of landlords do background checks, which means if someone with a city feds voucher finds a good, safe apartment that they can afford, but they have a record, there's a 90% chance they won't be able to get that apartment. And just the notion, I'm going to deviate from this, just the notion that you would send somebody who's done their time, as Delcina pointed out, from a prison to a congregate shelter, that's inhumane. Wow, who thought of this?
Right.
When I was in Ward's Island, one of the things that made me say, I can't do this, I'm going to the streets, because there was so much conflict in it. And I was in a section at the Clark Thomas Center that I say it was where the Akis was at, because it was really sectioned off. Somewhat like how prison is sometimes. And when I'm talking to the brothers, many of them were from parole. I used to try and get out there early, but I didn't know if I had a warrant. And I used to confuse the parole officers with the warrant squad. It's nice to try to run out there early in the morning. But what they would say almost unanimously was that they had so much trauma of being in that experience. Many of them wish they were back in jail. Many of them encountered incidents that in jail they could deal with, but in the congregate setting where they trying to stabilize themselves and get back on track, they couldn't even address it. They was treated by shelter staff, by shelter police in such an inhumane way. I didn't have that experience, but I could imagine how triggering it was. And the most distressing thing is I was able to actually choose to say I would rather see I can do that. I walked out, I left, and I played the street. I played the trains, all weather conditions. But these brothers and their sisters that go through the same experience, these brothers didn't have a choice. They literally had to stay there. Many had no issues returning home. Many of them had family in the boroughs or in neighboring boroughs, but could not go back to their home simply because it was more convenient for parole officers to visit one location. Who thought of this? I don't know, I'm not no lawyer, but this has to be cruel and unusual punishment. You did your time. You trying to do the right thing. And they put you in a place like this. And sometimes I'm so glad to see directly impacted people speaking to these issues, because we can talk about what really goes on in there.
That's right.
What it really looks like. How we're really living. these places are not for human beings. And so I'm not going to go on no more.
It's a prison on the street.
Say it again, brother.
It's a prison on the street.
Wow.
It's a prison that you can walk out of every day, come out here, walk around the street, and then go back to jail. Same institution and setting, just like a prison.
Just like a prison. So let's. That's right. So I'm gonna keep it short. I'm being honest. I'm extremely tired. I still got a whole bunch of things to do, and I thank you for everybody for coming out and being here. And I'm glad to be among you. I stand in solidarity with everybody. And let's pass this bill.
You know, passion doesn't necessarily translate into someone raising their voice very loud. But obviously Sham's words and what he said has power. And we share in his pain for all the women, the men, those from the LGBTQI plus community who are in shelters where they don't belong. We know right here at Bellevue Men's Shelter, over 50% of the people that are being released from prison are going to these kind of shelters. They're uninhabitable. They should not be there. That's why we say pass Intro 2047, because housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
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 At this time, we're going to bring on one of our other strong and powerful and committed people to this issue. Our brother Felix Guzman. Felix is a leader at Local New York. He's also a poet, an organizer, an advocate, a father, and a survivor of many broken systems. He is a longtime member of the Fair Chance for Housing campaign. Let's bring on Felix.
Thank you everyone who's here. Thank you for everyone who's doing the work and critically involved and engaged in this work. So I'm formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless. I like to preface that all the time when I'm speaking, because when you look at me, I don't look like the stereotype that they say that incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated people, or homeless people look like. So I want to actually say that so that you can actually humanize that and take a look at the real reality is that everyone is a paycheck, 2 paychecks, and a moment away from homelessness and making a wrong decision that could end up in incarceration. So give me one moment while I give the speech up. Sorry. So housing is essential for people to find and maintain jobs, support their families, to engage in community. When we talk about housing, we talk about healthcare, we talk about education, we talk about access to equality, we talk about bettering oneself to actually be able to be a part of the community in a healthier way, to be engaged, to be role models, to actually be able to go forward and do things that actually engage the community and make it healthier for all. So when we talk about housing, we talk about equality, we talk about social progression, we talk about just movement building. So I want to actually encourage everyone that's out there to get engaged, to get active, to tweet, to email, to call, to get involved, to call on Corey Johnson to pass his 2047, to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to have safe, affordable housing, because we all know that housing is a human right.
Yeah.
There are nearly 750,000 people in the city with a conviction record. That's more than 1 in 10 adults, but it's not just adults that are impacted. It's entire family that gets turned away and actually has to fight for an opportunity to actually have some civility and some humanity and some dignity. We're talking about families that are impacted by incarceration. We're talking about children that are in the shelter system that actually don't have an avenue to go forward, that actually have to go through the shelter system and go to school, being bussed around, trip to trip, and have to keep on doing that day after day after day after day. We all know that that's a pause in their movement going forward. So when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about mass incarceration, we have to look at the families that are left behind, that are impacted, that are perpetually punished for infractions that could have been averted if we address the mass incarceration problem at its root, which is poverty. We need to actually start looking at the situations in our communities that are creating the opportunities for people to become incarcerated, and that is poverty, addressing poverty at its root, making sure there's jobs available for people, there's opportunities to take care of mental health in the community, there's opportunities for safe and affordable housing, there's education, there's access and equality and equity so that we all can move forward, so we can look at each individual one of us as neighbors, as community members, as brothers, fathers, sisters, mothers, cousins, uncles, and all of that, and that much more. We're actually fighting a fight that actually should have been handled years ago. It's unfortunate that this homelessness situation is perpetual, and the city seems to prioritize just warehousing without providing permanent solutions to the crisis at hand. There is no reason why I myself became homeless as a result of my building being turned into a shelter. My building got turned into a shelter. The city just seemed to believe that the landlord is in charge of everything. There's no aftercare on site. There's people fighting for their lives. And then the city told me to find housing, go into the shelter myself. Imagine trying to go into a shelter with a child and being formerly incarcerated, knowing that as a former housing specialist, homeless, and then all those issues that I heard about on the news from my clients, all the articles, the media, everything in the media is true. The degradation, the lack of humanity, the lack of dignity, the shame that comes along with having to be told that you can come in now to lay down in your bed, you can shower now, here's 3 hots and cot, toothbrush, towel, and a lock. And that's the extent of homelessness. That's the experience of homelessness. That's also experience of incarceration as well. Yeah. So when we talk about incarceration, we talk about being removed from community, we talk about being removed from access to power, to freedom, and then that hamster wheel happens when you're released. Then you have to come back to institutions like Bellevue Men's Shelter and then all the other shelters in the city and be told that it's a process to get housing. It's a process. We all know that homelessness can be eradicated instantaneously if laws were passed to actually give equity and opportunity to everyone. So we need to look at Intro 2047 as a pathway to allow our brothers and sisters to actually make it back into society in a healthy way. That being said, I thank you. I'm sorry that I spoke for a long time, but thank you. And housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
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 We want to thank Felix for sharing those words. And we want to thank Vocal for their consistent commitment to being on the front lines wherever there's a fight to be held, to make sure that social, human, and criminal legal reform justice exists. And so we're going to conclude this, but before we do, we want to bring on somebody to share just a couple of words, and that's the founder of the Fortune Society, David Rothenberg, who we spoke about earlier. Just want to share a couple of words. He's asked us, so we're going to bring David on just to share a couple of words.
Give it up, Dave.
Right there is the Bellevue shelter, directly on the other side of the city. Directly on the other side of the city is Hudson Yard.
I was just there last night.
Very quickly, 103 of the apartments are empty because they're investments for big people who don't even live there. So in the shadows of those buildings are people lying there homeless. And the reason, and they built a subway extension because the real estate brokers have the kind of power to have with all the problems with the subway, they were able to get an extension because they're the largest donators to the political power structure of the city. If you want to know the politics of New York, you have to know the real estate industry.
That's right.
And the people that get the tax abatements to build those luxury high-rises are the very people that could find the alternatives for buildings like this. So as part of your strategy, I argue that you have to locate the real estate industry, apply the pressure, and tell them that we want solutions, and they have the money, the power, they've made the profits as a result of everything in this city, and with those profits, they have a responsibility to give back so that this city can function with fairness for
That's right, David.
Thank you, David, for that insight. Because housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
And we had Miss B here, and as she always said, we're going to get this bill passed. We are going to get this bill passed. And we thank Councilmember Levin again for his support and sponsorship and leadership of this bill. But Intro 2047 will get passed because housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight.
Housing is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight. Woo!